If you're a Zenless Zone Zero player, patch 2.4 is exactly the kind of patch you never want to see become the norm. While the patch absolutely has some really good ideas going for it, the issues 2.4 suffers from really do dampen the overall quality of the story being told. And coming right off the back of great patches with tense, highly emotional, and very dark themes, that drop is all the more apparent. It sounds bad, I know, but all of this is coming from a good place. I care about Zenless Zone Zero. It is the gacha game I enjoy the most and actively play day after day. Yes, I had a couple of videos recently glazing the heck out of HSR story, and for good reason. They deserved it. But ZZZ, while not reaching the same heights of epicness as an intergalactic war for the universe's very existence, it still does a great job of keeping its story grounded and its characters relatable. And honestly, it's also the gacha I'm having the most fun with. So when you watch me tearing into certain aspects of patch 2.4, know that it's coming from my earnest wish for the game to fix its mistakes and improve. So let's get into it. Let's start off with the most glaring issue, the missing voice lines. Before 2.4 was even launched, we received an official post stating that some of the voice lines will be missing. I initially didn't pay that much attention to this and thought it wouldn't be too big of an issue. Only when I started playing through 2.4 did I realize how bad the situation actually was. It wasn't just some voices that were missing, it was somewhere between 30 to 40% of the voice lines that were missing. Now, forgive me for being blunt, but I find this to be unacceptable on multiple fronts. First, and most importantly, this completely ruins the experience for story enjoyers. Yes, some people might shrug this off as not a big deal, and that's fine, but that is a subjective take based on their personal taste. From an objective standpoint, having almost half of the patch voice lines missing from a story-based combat game like ZZZ is immersion breaking. Every unvoiced line is a jolt that pulls you out of the narrative. Voice acting is more than just hearing a character speak. It conveys tone and emotion. It tells you more about what the character is feeling or thinking than the text ever could. A single line of dialogue can be delivered in multiple ways, each with a different subtext that will convey a different message. Even saying something as simple as "I love you" can be an insult when delivered in a sarcastic or hateful way. So having these voice lines missing does more than just remove the sound and force you to read. It takes away from the context, from your understanding and connection to the character. And I would argue that those elements are exactly the reason we're playing these games to begin with. After all, we all want to pull for these characters because we like something about them, whether it be their looks, their personality, or fighting style. So yes, objectively speaking, the lack of voice lines is a severe blow to the game's quality that repeatedly breaks your immersion and distracts from your enjoyment of the story. I am also disappointed with the way the official announcement was made, as merely stating that only some of the voice lines will be missing indicates that there wouldn't be that many. And that's exactly what I thought. I thought there would only be at most 10 lines missing in the entirety of the patch. Lo and behold, there are so much more, and some of them are even missing from critical story moments like Sarah's comic book section. In cases such as these, communicating to your player base in such a vague way doesn't come off as professional, it just comes off as disingenuous. I believe the better way to have handled this situation would have been with complete transparency. They should have mentioned that there is a substantial amount of voice work that is missing, while also mentioning the reason why. Now, if I were to make an educated guess, I would assume it's something to do with their focus on improving the narrative. The lines of dialogue that do not have any voice work done feel like last-second additions made to further flesh out the story. While I commend them for their commitment to the story, the lack of proper communication will lead to needless speculation, player frustration, and maybe even resentment. In situations like these, it would have been better to have been as transparent as possible to garner good faith from the community. It also didn't help that the compensation for this problem was a mere 100 polychromes. Allow me to put things into perspective. ZZZ's maintenance, which is a scheduled period of time where the game has to go offline and receive required updates, rewards players with 300 polychromes. The devs apologize that they have to routinely shut down the game for a few hours to apply updates to a live service title. But apparently, an unforeseen accident that damaged the overall story experience due to many voice lines not being available is only worth 100. If you were to ask me, I would tell you that an issue of this scope would need at the very least a free temple as compensation. You just can't release a story update in such a state and then just act like it's a minor hiccup. Yes, I'm coming down hard on ZZZ for this because I never want to see this mistake repeated. I find this completely unacceptable from a company that has not just the resources, but also the reputation for polished, high-quality content. Again, let me be clear, I understand why this might have happened. If the story was being reworked and needed new voice sessions, that's not something that you can rush. You can't drag voice actors into a studio on 2 days' notice. But that's exactly why transparency matters. Players can be incredibly understanding when you're honest with them. But when announcements feel like they're deliberately avoiding the truth, then goodwill evaporates quickly. So yes, I understand why it likely happened, but that's all I'm willing to give them. My understanding and nothing more. I love ZZZ, but I will not make excuses for it when it drops the ball. Next up, I want to talk about Dialyn. While her story was decent and and offered us an inside look as to who she was and her role as a Krampus judge, I have to say that it paled in comparison with Banyue and Ye Shunguang. To put it in the simplest of terms, it was rushed. Her part in the story was a footnote compared to Banyue and Shunguang. It was a separate entry that was stapled on top of the overarching plot instead of being naturally woven into it. What do I mean by this? Well, Dialyn is here as a Krampus judge to investigate and recover Banyue by force. Her part presented her as a person who can easily navigate social situations due to her cover as a customer service representative while hiding her actual combat prowess and frankly ruthless personality. Outside of that, we're shown that during her childhood, she was sacrificed in a ritual to guarantee the safety of her town. Except she learns from the voices of the dead that this was a lie, and it is heavily hinted that it was her own guardian, On Fang, that was responsible for this. But after this moment, the focus shifts to fully develop Banyue and Ye Shunguang, leaving Dialyn's backstory feeling incomplete. Now, part of this may be intentional, seeing as she is supposed to be an enigmatic character. They may be keeping the rest of it for 2.5. Basically, all we know is that she survived the sacrifice thanks to the voices. We don't know what happened to On Fang, we don't know what happened after she escaped the Hollow, and we don't know how she ended up joining Krampus. Contrast that with Banyue, where we're shown in his backstory how he came to be accepted by humans, why his guilt manifested, and how he ended up opening a school for martial arts. It focuses on showing how Banyue came to be the person he is today. The same can be said for Ye Shunguang. We're presented moments of her past. We're told how and why she survived, how she ended up being part of Yonghui Summit, where she has been up until now, and what she's been up to all this time. For both Banyue and Shunguang, their past has a clear path leading towards the present. For Dialyn, however, her past doesn't have that same path to bridge the gap. The story cuts off there to shift to our date with Shunguang. And I understand that we're doing this to build up Shunguang's story for 2.5, and I'm okay with it, but I honestly believe that her date scene, while cute, came at the cost of more of Dialyn's screen time and development. And that is quite the stark contrast compared to 2.3, where they were able to maintain great pacing throughout the patch's entire length while also juggling 3 different character stories that were masterfully woven into the plot, all of which concluded with a very satisfying payoff. Also, I know I didn't make a video on 2.3, so let me just say that whole story was absolutely amazing. It was a quest I thoroughly enjoyed, where they tackled story beats I absolutely adored. From Yadhari's mysterious role, to Monato's coming to grips with his dark side, and Lucia's reunion with her father that had me break down in the middle of my livestream. Listen man, I am just a sucker for the tragic father-daughter dynamic. Anyway, that's why I wholeheartedly believe that 2.4 could have done better with Dialyn and her characterization, but let's say that maybe her story will be further fleshed out sometime in 2.5, because otherwise it would just mean that she got the short end of the stick. Banyue, on the other hand, had a lot of impact, and I found myself pulled into his story much more than I expected. The one single problem I had with his story is the fact that at the start of 2.4, we're given the impression through Dialyn's voices that Banyue is some sort of murderous monster, but that's not exactly true. His only fault was prioritizing those he knew he had a higher chance of saving while completely abandoning those who had too low of a chance of surviving according to his algorithm. This earned him the ire of both those that died and those who still managed to survive. He is painted as a cruel and bloodthirsty machine, but his only real crime was pragmatism driven to the extreme. I don't like that this was another fake out just like we had with Hugo. I generally want to have actually morally gray characters to become playable. Characters with dark pasts where they may have been and maybe still are monsters or criminals, but through a twist of fate end up assisting and becoming part of the roster of agents working with the Phaethon siblings. Having Wise and Bell associate themselves with morally questionable characters will lead to more interesting story beats and character dynamics. It would provide the siblings with another layer of complexity simply by showing that they would be willing to work with agents that they disagree with as long as it gets the job done. If done properly, it could severely blur the lines between good and evil and even lead to moments where the morally good Phaethon siblings end up being wrong and the villains being right, turning the status quo on its head. Just imagine Wise and Bell choosing to willingly cooperate with someone they morally oppose, someone they don't trust or don't like or maybe even despise, and yet they are too useful to ignore. That by itself would add so much depth, and I hope ZZZ eventually goes there. Regardless, I do love the characterization Banyue got thanks to his story, going from a cold, unfeeling machine that only followed its core programming to awakening as a person with a conscience and feeling guilt and regret for having abandoned those he could have still saved. Survival rates be damned. This sense of having to atone for his sins reinforced his morality as seen when he was fighting till his breaking point, even though he already knew that it was a trap set up by his own disciple. He walked right into it as a way to not just face his own karma, but to give his disciple exactly what he wanted so that he can move on with his life after seeing what he considered his sister's killer be brought to justice. His story tells us so much about his personality. Banyue believes himself to be guilty and deserving of punishment. He has a strong sense of justice. He regrets his past decisions. He has a deep sense of responsibility towards those he has saved, as proven by his resolve to fulfill the promise of both his disciple's sister and Shunguang's parents. He is perceptive, as he was able to figure out that his disciple set up a trap for him, and he is subtle enough to not give away that he is just playing along with his plan. And finally, he has a well-developed sense of self-sacrifice, as we can see in the final cutscene where he shields both Wise and Dialyn from the miasma. He is a protector. As for Shunguang, we got to spend a lot of time with her, which lines up with the idea that the devs want to build her character for 2.5, where she will most likely have her grand moment to shine. This build-up, however, is what I consider to be the main cause of the pacing issues I've identified in the story. As I said before, I think the date with Shunguang was cute, but I think it would have better served the story had the date taken place off-screen, or at least not been as long, while giving more attention to Dialyn's arc, which definitely could have used the extra space. Then there's the issue with the gate. I get that she would be sentimental regarding her childhood home, but having that be the reason as to why we're not pushing onward and chasing down Sarah and Shi Wen is a little silly. I mean, who actually gets that attached to a gate? And regardless of how attached you are to a gate, wouldn't your concern and love for your brother far outweigh that sentimentality? It honestly felt like a contrived moment just so we could have an excuse to delay the final showdown. With that said, however, let me give credit where credit is absolutely due. The ending of 2.4 was unexpectedly phenomenal. No, I'm not talking about Shunguang's final cutscene, though that one does play a part in why it was so good. We've been told throughout version 2.x that drawing the Qingming sword is dangerous and will eventually leave their wielder as an empty husk devoid of memory and life. I honestly thought they would gloss over Shunguang drawing the sword against her own brother with some weak excuse that, oh, this was the first time using the sword, so it wasn't enough to actually trigger the side effects. Imagine how gut-wrenching the reality was for me when I had to sit at the end of the quest and realize that Shunguang had carefully written down everything she did before drawing the sword. Seeing her at the end of the quest with her diary in her hands, crying as she desperately tried to force herself to remember everything that happened in the past few days, tore at my soul. They did not soften the blow for this moment. Instead, they doubled down on the consequences, and the effects were immediate. No downplaying or watering down, just pure, raw, and tangible consequences for Shunguang's decision to draw the Qingming sword in her hour of need. This is Chekhov's gun, the principle that when you draw attention to a certain element in your story, like a gun, it should be fired by the final act. In our case, it's the sword, and not only was it drawn, but it severely damaged the character who did. And the best or worst part, depending on how you look at it, is that this isn't even Shunguang's patch. The climax of her story has yet to take place, and I severely doubt that we will not see another moment where she will wield the Qingming sword by the end of season 2. I'm really happy to see characters actually suffering setbacks due to their own recklessness, because now I, as a player watching this story unfold, can't help but worry for Shunguang and what will happen to her if she dares to use the sword again. I am terrified. What will she forget next? How much will she forget? Will it affect her physical health as well? This is why consequences exist, to make the audience anxious, to make them question the choices of characters, to trigger feelings of worry for them when they face a challenge, to feel sadness when they fail or relief when they succeed. Very well done on this front, Hoyo. Very well done. Lastly, I want to draw a little parallel between ZZZ and Wuthering Waves. The main reason for this being the common factor that they now both share, the existence of a rewrite in their stories and how both games were negatively affected by it. We assume that ZZZ's voice issues are due to the rewrite, but most of the lines of dialogue that lack voice work seem to be additions to an already existing story. They are newly inserted lines that were woven in for the sake of fleshing out the story even more. Compare that with what we know about the Wuthering rewrite 3 months before the game's launch. That rewrite didn't involve just adding details to the story. It changed a lot of aspects, plot points, character relationships, and even the chronological order of events, and the consequences of that rewrite are still felt to this day. With both of these as examples, we can easily see how devastating an unexpected rewrite can be for a game's narrative. In ZZZ's case, where the rewrite was rather surface level and nowhere near as in-depth as Wu was, we still have missing voice lines and pacing issues. Imagine how much worse it must have been for Wuwa, who basically had the core of its story gutted and reconstructed to appease the player base. But this also reinforces the hope I've previously expressed on this channel, that once these games recover from these rewrites, they will shine again and reach their full narrative potential. But that's going to be it for me. Let me know what your thoughts are on patch 2.4 in the comment section down below. If you enjoy what I do, please consider leaving a like and a sub, and share the video with your friends to help out with the algorithm. And if you want to help the channel in a more direct fashion, memberships are always appreciated and go a long way. As always, thank you for watching, thank you for sticking with the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, have a good one.